Hi, and welcome to Matt Holman Talks Mental Health, the podcast where I have the opportunity to sit down with amazing humans to talk about their journeys with mental health. Today, I'm so happy to introduce Nick Jemetta to the conversation. Welcome, Nick.
Hi there, how you doing?
Yeah, I'm very well, thank you. Good to see you. So as always, I'll just do a very brief introduction, how we got to this podcast recording, and then I'll let Nick do a proper introduction, let people know about what you're doing, Nick, and why you're here as well. So Nick and I, we've been following, I guess we've been following each other for quite a while on social media, on LinkedIn in particular. But it was just yesterday, so just the day before we put this recording together, that I saw a post that Nick put out, and I replied to it, and then within the magical moments of a few hours, we were getting together to record a podcast episode today. So it's fantastic. I love this. I love the sort of fluidity of bringing people as guests to the podcast rather than just planning for weeks ahead. We haven't sort of scripted anything. We've just had a first initial conversation this morning, the first time we've actually talked to each other or with each other in all that time. But it's great to have you, Nick. So quick introduction from you and what you're doing. Yeah, that'd be grand.
Yeah, awesome. Thank you for having me. So hi, everyone. I'm Nick Jemetta, and I'm the founder of Stories Matter, young startup. Only been doing it for 9 months now. And Stories Matter is really about changing narratives. It's around changing narratives to create more empowered cultures, because I really want to try and help businesses, teams, and individuals to thrive. So I operate in two main domains. One is in digital and technology, and the other, hence why we're here, is about wellbeing and mental health.
Amazing. And we're going to dive a little bit deeper into some of that a bit later. But as always, the big question that I ask to any of the guests that come onto this podcast is tell us a story. Well, stories matter, right? That's what you've already said. But I want you to tell us a story, Nick. Tell us a little bit about your journey, your story, your journey with mental health. That's the big question. So I'll leave that with you and I'll let you go.
So my journey with mental health, like many others, has been highly changeable. It's been quite dynamic, and it's only in more recent years that I've become more fully aware of what it actually means to say my journey with mental health, because I think for a long time, like probably many other people, I never really considered that I had mental health, which is a strange thing to say, because I've now come to know that, guess what, we all have mental health. Surprise. Yeah. But I've certainly had periods of poor mental health, and I've always struggled with anxiety. I've always been quite an anxious person. You might not know it looking at me, but I'm nearly 40, so I'm an 80s child, and back then the topic wasn't discussed, emotions weren't discussed, feelings weren't discussed. The definition of what it meant to be a man was quite binary. I always say in the talks I give when I share my story that unless you were Vinnie Jones, you really weren't up to scratch. I've got nothing against Vinnie Jones, but it was very much that. Muscly, very macho, great at sport, showed very little emotion other than anger and rage. And I just didn't fit that mode. And, with hindsight, I think one of the things a couple of things that drove my anxiety was, inner turmoil, a complete lack of self-confidence, self-awareness, self-belief. As I got older, I think it turned into, and this is something I found out the other day, but it resonated, milestone anxiety. Specifically, there was this linear path laid out for me, and I didn't feel like I could hit all the milestones as milestones of smashing out school, smashing out university, getting the job, driving your career to be a CEO, meeting the one, having children, all those things that society conditions us are how you live our life. And I never felt like that. And that weighed really, really heavily on me, because when you feel like you can't fit the model of what society wants, it makes you feel like an outsider, like an alien. You feel like you're not going to make the people that love you proud of yourself. You don't feel like you're going to be able to make yourself feel proud, and it weighed heavily. Bullying was a thing for me at school as well, and that just it was like the house of cards was getting bigger. As I sort of transitioned to university, I hadn't dealt with any of the baggage. I hadn't even recognized I had poor mental health, to be honest. And when I started university, I sort of share that, and this isn't a detriment to my university, that the first two things they told me were how I got my student loan and where the bar was.
Right.
It's a pretty important third criteria that
give now you money and somewhere to spend it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
And I spent it. I did. There was no conversation about signposting to support services if I ever struggled in some way. And I was struggling and I needed that support, but I didn't know where to go. I was ashamed and embarrassed of how I felt and didn't know how to articulate it. And one thing led to another, and the anxiety started to sort of spiral out of control, especially when it was combined with the signposting to the bar, because too much alcohol, antidepressant on top of all my struggles. I started having suicidal thoughts, and life was really tough. I'd love to sit here and tell your listeners that I found therapy and I managed to get my way out in a very intentional way, but I just didn't. Again, therapy back then didn't feel like something that was even relatable to me. It certainly wasn't accessible. So the way that I moved past some of that was by doing inner work, was by recognizing that so much of the struggle was the external pressures that were being put on top of me, that I needed to do inner work and I needed to surround myself with the right kind of people. So I suppose I did have intention. It just wasn't a medically, a medical intention. It was very much about developing myself and recognizing that the anxiety was there and it was part of who I was, but I could learn how to manage it and I could learn how to harness it. And like I say, I surrounded myself with the right people, and that combination of things over time started to get me into a better place. As I went into the workplace, the anxiety was there and there was no way I was going to talk about it. This was in the early 2000s. It just wasn't happening. But with my anxiety in particular, I think a lot of your listeners will probably relate. It made me very thirsty for knowledge, because I always wanted to make sure that I could answer every question. When your mind races, sometimes you look for every possible solution and avenue to calm yourself. But that's really blooming useful in the workplace, because you ask lots of questions, you're curious, you've got this thirst for learning. I was very intentional with the direction of my work, and I poured a lot of the sort of anxious energy into work, but in a fairly positive way, at least to begin with. And I also started to recognize that the compound effect for me would be really powerful. And I knew that over time, if I could try and make myself 1% better, I was likely to make myself feel 1% better, or 1% healthier. Even if that took me a decade, I knew that this might not be a quick fix, because I think with a lot of poor mental health, it isn't a quick fix, and we should reconcile ourselves to that. And I started to take steps out of my comfort zone. And the reason I did that was because in our discomfort, there's growth. And in growth, I found evidence to demonstrate to myself that I was more than I thought I gave myself credit for. I found this space of, wow, okay, I can start to build confidence and build capability by recognizing all the things I've achieved in the past. And every baby step I take into a period of discomfort allowed me to grow. And it set me on this trajectory where I started to lose some of my fear.
Okay.
I started to build a bit more self-belief. I started to value myself. And the anxiety was still there, but I had it much more under control. I started to hit some of the milestones that I didn't think I could hit, like meeting someone, like having a family.
Right.
And those things obviously are going to help when you built up in your head for so long that that's not you. And as I got older, I started to realize that this definition of what life looked like was a complete fallacy. When you're a teenager, it's very hard to imagine that life's anything but what you see portrayed. But there are so many paths, and that kind of squiggly path is a framework I really like, because my path started to become more squiggly. My career got a bit more squiggly. The steps out of my comfort zone got more squiggly. I took myself on a speaking with confidence course, and I have a stutter, which I'm hopefully masking pretty well.
Wow.
So speaking with confidence was quite difficult to me for me. But when I took myself out of my comfort zone, I knew that I would feel 1% better and 1% more capable than before I started. And on that day, which was 4 years ago, I spoke publicly about my mental health. The story that I've just shared, I shared then, and I'd kept that inside for 35 years.
Wow.
But when I opened up and when I articulated some of the things that had helped and how it had made me feel, the response back was totally unexpected, because the response back from total strangers was, if you feel willing and able, you shouldn't keep this to yourself, because this can help. And I'd never considered that me sharing pain and struggle would help. Yeah, I genuinely hadn't, because my world was not in mental health. It was in my day job, which was in digital and technology. And my life changed. That day, my life changed. I said to my wife, you're probably not going to like this, but you're not going to be seeing that much of me for a little while, because I need to do something with this.
Yeah.
The fire's been lit. I can't extinguish it. So I took it into work alongside my day job, and I challenged the business I was in about what they were doing to support the mental health of colleagues. The answer was nothing. And I said something I'd never said to a senior leader before. It just came out, and I said, that isn't good enough. And within a week, him and he was the sponsor, and I was the founder of the first network, employee resource group, employee network, focused on the topic. Shared my story to 120 people in our canteen, and the journey just skyrocketed. We built an internal digital community, which was the largest of all the other communities. There was communities focused on sexuality and religion and disability, but the mental health one, it transcends all of that, because we've all got it.
Yeah,
it's by definition the most inclusive. So, really started to be a vanguard for change, I suppose, in the organization. I then started to take that outside of the organization. I started to do talks sharing my story in charities, in schools, in other businesses, and this was all alongside day jobs. So I wasn't charging for it. I was doing it to try to make the world a better place.
Yeah,
it sounds very grandiose, and I'd never had ambitions to do that. But when I realized the potential that I had to make a difference, and with 2 young children, I knew if they ever asked me, at the end of my life, whether I'd done something worthwhile, I wanted to be able to look into their eyes and say genuinely that I had, and I'd done my best.
Yeah.
And then when lockdown hit, I went on an adventure that was totally unexpected, because I've been doing all of this work in the mental health space, and therefore I was completely in tune and aware of the impacts of lockdown. We were having these kind of Zoom calls that we're doing now, and I noticed that to begin with, everyone was kind of checking and seeing how people were doing, but very quickly afterwards, it was straight to agenda. And particularly in the business I was in, it was really heavily affected by the lockdown, and there was a lot of rapid transformation that had to happen, and I got that, but we were losing our humanity. And that was impacting people, and people were a business's greatest asset. Without incredible people, you're not going to be generating profit. So I decided to do something about it, and I decided to wear fancy dress to a work call. I know it sounds very random.
I remember seeing it.
I know it sounds random, but there is a reason I did it. I was juggling homeschool, and we were watching PE with Joe on YouTube. And one Friday he did, he wore fancy dress, and me and my family wore fancy dress. And I had a call immediately after the workout. And I looked down at myself and I thought, I haven't got time to change, so this is a big problem, but I've got an opportunity here, because I'm pretty confident if I reveal myself in, I think it was a skeleton onesie from memory, I'm really curious just to see the reaction. The reaction at first was a few people dumbfounded, a few people did face palms, but more people were laughing and smiling.
Brilliant.
And the dynamic of the Zoom call instantly shifted. And throughout the whole day, I was getting loads of people asking me what I was doing. And at the end of the day, I said, I'm going to carry on doing this because I'm having fun, you're having fun, I'm doing no harm. And I ended up wearing 20 costumes, and I ended up raising some money for charity. And I set out to raise £250. I raised something like 3,000. And this whole experience was an incredible one for my family, for me, for my workplace. The costumes got put in the loft, literally. But then they came back out after a few months, because we hit another lockdown around Christmas. And I thought, is it old news, or does it still resonate? And I thought, screw it, I'm having fun, I'm going to do it anyway. So I wore more Christmas themed costumes. So I was Scrooge, I was Father Christmas, I was Mrs. Claus, and it resonated again, even bigger than before. And I got my big break, because throughout this period, I've been trying to get into the media. And I say that not with the intention to demonstrate that I've got an ego, because I knew I was having an impact within a business. If I could scale it, I knew that the ripple effect would be larger than I could comprehend. But getting into the national media is really difficult, even though I had a unique angle. But the Metro picked up my story. And from there, the touch paper was lit, because a few weeks later, I find myself live on BBC Breakfast wearing a wetsuit, being interviewed by Naga and Charlie about what the heck I'm doing and whether or not my workplace is taking me seriously.
Yeah.
And the effect of this was just overwhelming. It was really overwhelming, but in an incredibly positive way. I had a fancy dress brand contact me and send me boxes and boxes of costumes.
What? That's mad.
They sponsored me in effect. So
Yeah.
I got into a place where in the end, I wore 100 costumes, not in consecutive days, but over 100 days over a period of a year or so, probably. And I raised more than £10,000 for charity. I actually got back onto BBC Breakfast a second time. Would you believe it?
Yeah.
I don't know why they wanted me on again, but this time I went on as Darth Vader. It was my final day. And my story was covered all over the place. I didn't make it. Well, I made it internationally, but only to Panama, weirdly. The UK ambassador to Panama picked up my story on Twitter and was suddenly a big supporter of me,
Wow.
which is very random.
But
it was a really just an amazing experience. I mean, one of the other highlights of that was I met Joe Wicks.
Right.
So Heart Radio arranged a surprise Zoom call with me and my family, and all of a sudden Joe Wicks pops up. And it was just a really amazing adventure, and actually it still lives with me because I have this alter ego now called Fancy Dress Dad, and that's because Just Giving partnered with me and created this whole brand around what I was trying to do. And the fancy dress comes with me now because I mentioned at the top that I run my own business, and that came as a result of a transition out of the workplace, ironically from experiencing burnout, not linked to my fancy dress, I have to say, but linked to a workplace and a culture that just didn't work for me, and it made me ill. And the reason I started my own business is because when you get ill through your work, it gives you a perspective across your whole life that you can never really go back on. It gives you the perspective that it's important to set boundaries. It's important to look after yourself, and that your work should not come at the detriment to your health. And I felt like I had enough experience. I had all this passion for mental health bubbling over that I thought I could do something with this, and I could do something in a way that is unshackled and is down to me to define. So now when I talk to organizations, when I train organizations on how to create mentally healthy cultures, it is an option that I give clients. And I always say to clients, you're never going to hear anyone else saying this, but do you want me to come dressed as Hulk Hogan?
There are other options though, right?
There are plenty of other options.
That's
there
your
are
favorite
hundreds.
one though. I guess that's your favorite one, right? That's your go-to.
It's one of them. Pat Sharp. Do you remember Pat Sharp?
Oh gosh, yeah.
He's the other go-tos, because I was always absolutely desperate to go on Funhouse.
Oh, okay.
When I was a kid, and now that vehicle of dressing up in fancy dress, it might sound silly and trite, but actually it developed a much deeper meaning for me because and for my audience, because when you make a small change, like changing your appearance, it completely disarms anyone that's listening. Brilliant, and the fact you're going to talk about mental health is a complete surprise to them, because they assume you're coming in to be a clown or to do some kind of team bonding. But when you open up with a story about mental health and about positivity and about transformation, the engagement levels I get and the feedback I get, they just blow me away every time. I keep thinking, at some point, Fancy Dress Dad surely is going to be a thing of the past, but not yet.
Yeah.
Up until this point, people still seem pretty intrigued by the notion of having Spider-Man or Darth Vader rock up to their workplace.
Do you try and do the voices as well, or are you just like dressing as them?
It depended. I did, because I shot some, frankly, embarrassing. My daughter would definitely call them embarrassing videos of me prancing around my kitchen dressed as Rudolph, or doing the sort of Hulk Hogan, all this, or putting on. I even tried putting on the Darth Vader voice live on TV, on national TV, and I'm so glad I did. But at the time, I remember thinking, what the hell are you doing? But it was too late. We were on air, and I was going for it. And where I bring the characters to life, I can, but I'm no actor.
Really,
That isn't one of my skills.
Hollywood hasn't been calling yet. Yeah, no. Panama maybe.
Yeah,
equivalent of Hollywood.
Have they got a big film industry in Panama?
I guess they.
If you're listening, I'm very open to opportunities.
Mr. Ambassador. Thank you very much. Oh, it's incredible, honestly, Nick. I just you know what, you've made me smile, you've made me laugh, you've made me happy, and I think that's what it's about, though, isn't it? I think how do you feel? So here's a quick question for you, about reflection of positive mental health, because everything at the moment is so doom and gloom and dark, and and everything else. And how do you feel about that sort of reflection to positive mental health?
I mean, it rings so true to me, because
Yeah.
all the work I do and everything I believe and all my experiences have told me that because we all have mental health, we all have the opportunity to have positive mental health, or to at least, give ourselves and equip ourselves in the best possible way to strive for positive mental health.
Yeah.
And, there are so many things that we can all do that, are not rocket science. Some of it is about building great habits, about inner work, as I said earlier, developing the right mindset, surrounding yourself with the right people. But I think all of that prepares ourselves for the reality of life, which is that it's going to be difficult.
Yeah.
And I've already described, I've been on a roller coaster with my mental health. I can't sit here and say I've got a diagnosable mental illness, because I think that is a different category. But I can say proudly, I have mental health. I have really positive mental health right now. I've had really bad mental health in the past, but in the future, if I experience bad mental health again, I'm equipped for it.
Yeah.
I know the things I can do to manage that situation.
Yep.
I'm more aware, so therefore I can take action earlier. It can be preventative, but I'm also, I recognize, and I'm not proud to refuse help. When I burned out, I phoned the doctor.
Right. Yep.
And I think it's an important point of reflection, especially when there's two guys having a chat. As you said, so many men listening to this may not feel like they can talk to the doctor, but the reality is there is only so far you can go on your own. And sometimes you have to look for professional help, whatever that looks like to you.
Yeah, and I find that fascinating. And I talk a lot on these conversations with people around self-awareness. Having the ability to take notice when things are changing. In self-awareness, of course, it's a personal journey, and you have to know when things are changing. But a lot of people with things like depression, living with those feelings for a very long time without even sort of realizing that there could be other things in play. I'm going to ask a question about relationships for you, Nick. So obviously you've got a family around you. Do they notice when things are changing? Would they be able to sort of see some of those signs? I know your children are young, but do you sometimes see them sort of reflecting some of those challenges that you might be showing?
I think we have a very open dialogue in our house about feelings, which is something we never did when I was growing up, and that to me is super important. I think my children will call it out to me if maybe I'm a bit snappier than normal, or if maybe I'm spending a bit of time on my phone and I'm a bit distant, and work is consuming me, and that could potentially start to spiral. They kind of call me out on that kind of thing. My parents are actually very good at being aware of things. When I post or when maybe something isn't quite right, I'll get a message from my dad, and that doesn't sound like much, but they didn't know anything about this until 4 years ago. Right. And they were the first sort of people I told, other than the total strangers, but I doubt they listen to this podcast, my parents. But,
you never know, right?
You never know.
Maybe the ambassador in Panama is going to have a listen. But you never know who's going to listen, right? Anyone's possible. I
had a conversation with them. I did need, a little bit of whiskey to help me. Just to, I'm not suggesting whiskey is a good coping strategy, by the way. I only had one, but just to, because I found that the most difficult conversation, because I know how I would feel if my children opened up about struggles after they've been through a difficult period. I want to encourage them to try and be open and honest up front. So I think because I'm now more open, everyone else around me is more aware. And therefore I do get more people reaching in. And I think that's one of the values you and I share in common, is we want to open up more conversations and give more people confidence to have this dialogue. And then certainly within my own circles, as a result of the work I do, I definitely see that both ways, both me to them and them back to me.
Yeah. I absolutely, agree with everything you said there. And the thing that I think a lot of people struggle with is having those close relationship conversations about these things. So a lot of people will reach out to organizations like Samaritans because they feel, more comfortable talking to a total stranger, which I get. And, being a Samaritan, I see that all the time. But I just find it sad that they can't talk to their family, or they don't have those strong bonded relationships in place. And that's something I think that we can all perhaps try to achieve. And I guess that comes down to how the relationships have evolved throughout our lifetimes as well, right? So can't say it's easy to fix for everybody. Apologies out there if anybody's listening thinking, it's not that easy, because I get it, it's not that easy. But by having conversations and you know this, Nick, from the stories you're telling to people, by starting conversations, having conversations, it does open up a totally different conversation dialogue around these these challenges that we're experiencing.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it changes to the point where it no longer becomes a thing.
Yeah.
And people said, talking about my mental health, it's that kind of sharp intake of breath, and it makes you feel sort of super uncomfortable. But if I was struggling, I mean, I remember when I got signed off with burnout at work, I phoned the doctor, and that evening I phoned my parents.
Right.
They rewind 5 or 6 years ago.
Yeah.
If I'd phoned them at all, I'm very confident I wouldn't have told them the real reason.
Yeah.
But this time, because of the evolution of that relationship, I was totally honest.
Yeah.
I was honest with how I was feeling, why I was feeling like that. I was open about my symptoms, because, by the way, when you have a period of poor mental health, anyone listening that may not have experienced it, you're going through a period of poor health, if I can reframe it, because your body is one piece. There's lots of different moving parts, but it all works synchronously. So if there's a problem in your head, guess what? It impacts every other area.
Yeah.
I was having heart pains, and I was struggling to sleep, and all these other physical symptoms that come as a result of it. So that's another thing I try and make clear in my work is poor mental health is poor health. I think we need to almost slightly reframe our position that it's only going to be our mind that's going to be troubled. Generally speaking, it's going to be our being, our self.
That's a great perspective as well, and I think that's really useful and insightful, because you're right, we try to detach the mental and the physical apart, but actually they're very interlocked and connected together, aren't they? We've got a few minutes left of this recording. It's incredible. I love listening to people telling their stories, but it's just the time is the limiting factor of everything that we do, of course. So just final thoughts from you, Nick, where you're heading on your journey, what you want to do, what you want people to understand about your future and your path. So I'll throw that back to you, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. I think the path I'm on, I'm excited about, because I feel like it's a path not particularly well trod, and the reason that I say that is because I'm multi-passionate, and there is so much advice out there that we should niche down on one thing, and I want to kind of break the model a bit on that, like I have with some of the other things I've already achieved. So I said up top, I've set up this business, and I get a lot of people telling me, just focus on your mental health work, just niche down on that. But I'm too passionate about too many things to do that. So that's why I'm embarking on a journey towards a bigger vision, which is about empowering people, empowering teams, creating empowered cultures, because that allows me to scale my impact. It allows me to create cultures in which people can thrive, cultures in which conversations about mental health and well-being are encouraged, cultures that encourage the right leadership behaviors, cultures that encourage coaching. But it also allows me to be a total nerd and to lean into my other world, which is about using technology to build amazing digital products. And those two things can sound like they don't work together, but when we have a vision and a purpose, there are multiple ways to attack it. That's probably sort of one of my biggest learnings, and something I'm most looking forward to getting stuck into. I'm slightly apprehensive that my vision is a 10-year vision. So talk to me again in a decade. Let's see how I've got on.
10-year vision. Wow, I think I'm impressed. I'm not sure how my vision goes. I feel a bit worried now. Yeah, I sort of.
We can chat offline.
Yeah, please. Yeah. Because I've got this sort of daily vision.
I love that.
But I genuinely
need more of that
in that moment, and I think there's that balance, isn't there? I don't have sort of the vision too far out, but my daily vision is today I do great things. Today I work with amazing people, and if that's what I achieve for today, I'm doing good. And that's ultimately where I go each day. So 10 years to one day, there is a big gap between those two. So there must be a point in there somewhere that would fit for everybody, right? But that's good. Well, I'm so honestly so proud of the work you're doing, and I'm so pleased with the fact that you're in this lane, you're doing what you're doing, you're supporting cultural shift, you're looking at mental health from a different perspective again, and it oh my god, honestly, there's so many avenues of conversations we could have explored in this conversation. I'm sure we will stay connected, definitely in conversations outside of this recording. Nick, it's been a pleasure. I knew it would be anyway, as I always say to the guests, but
you said it to everyone.
Yeah, I know. I've cheapened it a little bit by doing that. No, I genuinely mean it. I love these conversations. You know, this is number 130 something of the
Wow.
ones that we've managed to do since November of 2020. So look, just want to say a huge thank you, Nick. Thank you so much for making me smile and making me laugh. My life isn't easy at times. Like we all know, most of us on our journeys, we have days that are good and bad. So I definitely needed a smile and a laugh this morning, and you've definitely achieved that. I hope anybody listening also, you know, please go and check out Nick's work. Please do go and check out the things that he's been talking about as well. Follow him on LinkedIn, wherever else you can follow him. Be the Panama ambassador and follow it on Twitter, I guess is where that would happen. Please do. Nick, it's been a pleasure, mate. I really appreciate it. I just want to wish you all the best on your journey. Look after yourself and your family, of course, as well, and take care.
Thank you, and the same to you. And one final note, and apology, I'm sorry I didn't wear fancy dress to this call.
I did sort of think, should I mention it?
Maybe next time.
And that's for the people who are listening on the podcast who wouldn't have known you weren't.
Yeah, I know. Just ruined the illusion.
Exactly. Yeah. Amazing stuff. Well, maybe next time, right? Maybe next time.
Absolutely. Take care.
All right, buddy. No worries. Look after yourself. Take care.
You too.